Jakarta, population 11 million, or 34 million if counting the greater metropolitan area. It's one of the world's most congested cities, brutally lacking in green spaces, the air often thick with exhaust fumes. If this is your first contact with Indonesia, then it's a lot to take in. The tropical beach paradise, this is not. But this is the commercial capital and the beating heart of Indonesia, one of Earth's most populous countries and one of its biggest economies. Jakarta may not be known as a tourist favorite, and for that reason I'd avoided it on previous trips. But I finally wanted to see it for myself, and I'm very glad I did. As it turns out, there's actually a lot to experience in Jakarta. Alright, I've really missed Southeast Asia and Indonesia specifically. As soon as I got off the plane here, I realized how much I'd missed this part of the world. Jakarta is definitely a bit of a concrete jungle. It's occasionally referred to as the Big Durian, in reference to New York's The Big Apple. And such a divisive fruit seems like a suitable name for a city that seems to inspire many a love-hate relationship. But right now, I'm beyond thrilled to be here amid all this colorful chaos. My first almost obligatory stop is the small historical area of Jakarta, where the architecture clearly reminds of its colonial history. I'm in Kota Tua, which is simply Indonesian for old city. This is an area of particular interest to me because I am Dutch, and of course there was a lot of colonial history between the Netherlands and Indonesia. And this area used to be known as Batavia before it became Jakarta. The city was Batavia, and it was from where the colonies were administered. So you will see some Dutch-style buildings here. Over there it will say Gouverneurskantoor, the governor's office. And this is the old part of town. One of the attractions here is riding a bicycle around the square, which I find quite amusing. I didn't know that riding a bicycle could be an attraction, but it turns out it is. If you look at all foreign, it won't take long here for you to be approached by students wanting to practice their English, which, if you have a minute, is really good fun. So it's kind of interesting that Batavia was here and not somewhere else. And the reason is that the Dutch came here, and even at the time, this whole area was below sea level. And I guess the Dutch could have just decided to settle anywhere and be high and dry, but they saw the swampy lands below sea level here and thought, aha, just like home, this is where we will settle. I don't know why this area was chosen. It was a problem in the beginning because there were so many swamps around here that there were loads of mosquitoes, and that meant a lot of malaria. So the colony of Batavia struggled a lot with that. And I guess the legacy of this is still to this day, Jakarta is struggling with the sea level. Jakarta is one of the fastest sinking cities in the world, which has more to do with the extraction of groundwater, but the fact that it is on very low land doesn't help. Here is a real lovely food market, which has not necessarily Indonesian food, but food from everywhere in Asia. There's Chinese, Malaysian, Singaporean, Taiwanese. Although I really want to get into the Indonesian food, I know I'll be eating a lot of it in the coming weeks. So I ordered a nice little laksa, and I'm going to have a nice little lunch here. I spent the afternoon in a wild mission to fix my phone that had suddenly stopped working, but when night fell, I was more than ready to dig into the Indonesian cuisine. I went to Blok, a place I'd often seen recommended by locals for street or market food. The area was absolutely packed with people, and the options here are absolutely overwhelming in this incredible feast of Indonesian food. Although I've been to Indonesia before, I still felt a little out of my depth here.
Luckily, I'm here with Nabila, a local guide who knows about every last food
The
stall
Blok
here.
is ginger.
I can't stress enough how much fun it is to go through a market like this without having to guess whatsoever what is good to try. I had an absolute blast trying as many things as I could.
We only have this, I mean, you only can see this in Indonesia. Interesting because we call it fruit soup.
Fruit soup.
Yes, it's a fruit soup.
What is this?
All right, let's load up.
So you like this? And also there's this one that is a
Wrapped in banana leaves here is nasi kucing, meaning cat rice, a bite-sized meal that would be the appropriate size for a cat. Ah yes, sate, Indonesia's famous skewered meat. There's just one thing that could make this better, some monosodium glutamate.
This is very amusing to
Yeah.
me. I've never seen it presented like this.
It's in it like that. Yeah, you should try that one.
By the way, MSG apparently is not bad for you. Just Google Chinese restaurant syndrome for an interesting history of this additive. I, for one, find it very delicious. If you want to have the exact same experience that I did here, check the link in the description. This tour is such good fun and it can serve as a culinary crash course for your entire Indonesia trip. I highly recommend it. Now for some desserts, starting with a hot ginger drink called STMJ. People generally don't drink as much alcohol in Indonesia, but this non-alcoholic drink feels as potent as an Irish coffee, thanks to the extraordinary amount of ginger in it. Along with the other ingredients of milk, egg, and honey, it gives you a warm energy boost. Invigorating. Let's also have a sweet bamboo drink. The fresh shoots are crunched up with the machine in the back.
They're like, yeah.
Feeling utterly saturated, I still went on to a second area, known as Sabang or Salim Street, where you can get street food until the late hours.
And it's made with rice flour. Simple and small snacks like that. And like everyone loves egg, right? So it's just...
It had been a long day, and by this point all my senses had just been beaten into submission. What would have been great right now is a sensory deprivation chamber, but I settled for my thankfully quiet and dark hotel room. In a city as chaotic as Jakarta, it's important to have an oasis to retreat to.
So I don't know why people are banging on about the traffic in Jakarta. 'Cause there's no traffic at all. What are they talking about? No traffic. Do you hear this? No cars. Actually, it's car-free Sunday. It's really nice. Look. So many people are running here, and it's actually really early in the morning. It's like 6 a.m. I'm still jet lagged, so I couldn't sleep. So, I thought, let's just get out and see what is happening. And what is happening is no traffic. Honestly, last night, amongst all the lights and stimulation and audio-visual assault, I kind of got overloaded a little bit on all the noise and sights and sounds. So when I got to my hotel, I was like, oh yeah, oh. But when I closed my eyes, you still have that flickering in your eyes from all the intensity that you experience. Something I hadn't felt for a while. I remember feeling that after spending a lot of time in Akihabara district in Japan, in Tokyo. And then I experienced it again here. So anyway, this is really nice. This is a good cure for my overloaded senses today. they do have bicycle paths in Jakarta, but when I was seeing it the other day, like there was no bicycles whatsoever, and I can understand why, because there's so many mopeds and cars that you probably just still feel very unsafe. But now, today, there's some cyclists. They've come out, and they are here. Even the cats are able to have a nap now. That's how quiet it is.
Urusan money, no worry. Pakai Dream. Mau cuan?
They literally have a starship bursting out of the building. I saw that last night, but it wasn't so noticeable that this is a screen. It's a pretty good illusion.
After a few more sensory palate cleansers, I was ready to explore Jakarta further. Various religions coexist in Indonesia, as exemplified by this cathedral, which is right across the street from its biggest mosque. In terms of pure capacity, this is actually the largest mosque in Southeast Asia.
This mosque is the third in the world in capacity because this mosque can accommodate for about 200,000 people when they come at the same time and praying together here. This mosque was full of people just 2 times in the year. That's in our big celebration because so many Muslim people, they won't pray together here. And it was full of people from the first floor until 5 floors.
Although the architecture is very much contemporary, it's still very interesting to visit this mosque and to appreciate its scale. To learn more about Jakarta, I went on a social and political walk, which felt a lot more in-depth than more kind of general walking tours that I've done in other places. My guide is Marie, a political science major who does a fantastic job explaining some of the recent history and current issues in Jakarta. I'll get back to Marie in a minute, but first let me explain a couple of things.
In Jakarta, there are kind of 2 major issues that everyone talks about, 2 political issues. One is the fact that Jakarta is the fastest sinking city in the world. Now, many news articles will put climate change in the headlines, and of course climate change has something to do with everything, and rising sea levels don't help if your city is sinking. But it's not the main issue with this. It's actually groundwater extraction. So in a lot of areas there's too much groundwater extraction, maybe unofficially or illegally, and this is causing problems. If you imagine a sponge, if there's a lot of water in a sponge, it has some resistance, it's more sturdy, and an empty sponge is very easy to squash down. And that is kind of what is happening with the ground in Jakarta. The sponge is empty a lot of the time, and the buildings are heavy, and so the city is sinking. There's some articles that say that by 2050, a third of Jakarta could be underwater. But that's only assuming that all of the mitigation efforts fail.
Back to Marie. I was curious to hear his thoughts about the seawall that's supposed to save Jakarta.
So there are 3 guys running for government,
Right.
and one of the guys the programs are to put the seawall.
Put the seawall.
Yeah, which I don't think will be as effective as managing the water distribution or water flow, just like the Dutch.
Is the solution building new water pipes and creating better water systems? Are they doing this?
What I've read is mostly about the
seawall.
You have to do a follow-up after.
Right.
You're not gonna just make a man-made wall to fight the sea, which is ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, the sea is like major, natural power.
The other hot topic is that Jakarta is no longer the capital. The administrative capital is moving to Nusantara, a new city that's being built in Kalimantan, or Borneo. This is not without its controversies. Like, in one way, you could think this is a good move because Jakarta is already overpopulated and has too many pressures. So you could move the government somewhere else and relieve some of that pressure. and build a city in a more kind of neutral location that is truly in the middle of Indonesia. But other people argue that it's a bad thing to move the capital away to kind of the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the rainforest of Borneo, because then you remove the government from where most of the people live. There are also many questions about the construction itself and whether the plans were done properly. And right now it's still one big construction site.
I think the idea of it is good. The means of it maybe is good. Of course, the government officials are not gonna deny anything. They're gonna support it all the way. They know that they sometimes maybe allegedly risk their own jobs if they have any negative comments. Maybe they can go anonymous online, but publicly they won't discourage the actual project. But sometimes maybe people who are activists are mostly going against the project because it was too soon to be planned and it took a lot of money to build. And then I think it's gonna be, the result of it or the advantages of having a new capital it's gonna take a while to see the actual results.
Jakarta is a city with its share of problems, but some things have actually improved in recent years.
So this is actually my first time in Jakarta, but it's my third big trip in Indonesia. And I've actually avoided the capital the previous times that I was here just because of what everyone was saying to me about the traffic in particular. I remember, this was a bunch of years ago, but I was in Yogyakarta, the different city, and I was in a hostel and some German backpackers came in and they were like huffing and puffing and they were saying, oh, it took us hours to get here, and they said it took them 8 hours just to get out of Jakarta, which normally would have maybe taken an hour and a half tops, but they were stuck in traffic the whole way. And that made such an impression on me that I always remembered Jakarta as this city that is just impossible and should be avoided. And I think actually it's time to update this a little bit, because now if you're a tourist in Jakarta, sure, there is a lot of traffic, but you can get around pretty easily. From the airport to the center there is an airport rail connection, which takes about 40 minutes. And if you want to get out of Jakarta, from the center you can take the very well named Whoosh high-speed train. I love that it's called Whoosh. And that will take you to the next city, Bandung, also in about 40 minutes. So getting in, getting out is easy. The trains don't get stuck in traffic. And if you want to navigate in the center of Jakarta, now there's an MRT, a metro system. They're starting to build it with a north-south line. Part of it is already finished, part of it will be finished in 2027. And then you can basically go from the more commercial center to the old center here, where some of the colonial era buildings are, and you'll be able to get around very easily. So I think the traffic situation is no longer a reason to not go to Jakarta.
Of course, the traffic may still suck for locals on a daily commute, but yeah, for a tourist, there are some pretty good ways to get around. And if there's no metro or train, you can always hop on the back of a scooter with the ride-hailing app like Grab or Gojek. These rides can be a little intense, but they are a quick way to get around, and sometimes you can even skip past cars that are stuck in traffic.
Okay, I often like to include museums in my videos, which I know doesn't make for the most exciting vlog content, because, you know, a museum is clearly something you should see for yourself. But I want to mention the National Museum of Indonesia, because actually I'm lucky to be able to visit today, because it's been closed for a very long time. There was a huge fire here that was a big tragedy. Some objects were lost, others had to be meticulously restored. And only a few weeks ago did this museum finally reopen. And the collection here is really interesting. It has a lot of Indonesian art and objects from prehistory and so on. And a lot of them are objects that were repatriated from the Netherlands, as they damn well should. Like, the cultural heritage of Indonesia clearly belongs in Indonesia, and it's really heartening to see a huge timeline of all the repatriations that have been done over the years. And some of the objects here have only been returned relatively recently, like just a few years ago. there's also a collection of Balinese art here, which is really interesting because it was put together in the 1930s and 1940s by two Indonesians and a German and Dutch collector. And even then, even back then, in these early days, they recognized that mass tourism was coming to Bali, and it would affect the art and it would affect the quality of the traditional art in Bali. So they started to collect authentic examples of Balinese art, which you can see here. So in this video I tried to show my personal experience in Jakarta, but I feel like I should still say a few words about whether it's worth going to Jakarta. I have to be honest, when I ask other travelers, the feedback almost universally is kind of negative. Jakarta is not a fan favorite among travelers, probably because it is very overwhelming with a lot of traffic and so on, but also a factor may be that there aren't that many kind of typical things to do for like an international tourist. I think if you're a resident here, you're gonna have lots of things to do. You can go to the zoo, to the aquarium, to various theme parks, and the shopping malls are there, so like lots of weekend activities exist. But I think if you're coming from further abroad, then those are not the things that you're probably looking for. So Jakarta, on the face of it, may not be a top destination, and I understand the argument that if you're going to Bali or you're going to have a beach holiday, you probably want to skip this city and just go straight to the place that you're really dreaming of going to in Indonesia. However, I would make the argument that if you're traveling longer in Indonesia, or maybe if you're at the start of a trip through Java, then you should spend at least a day here. Like, why not? This is the capital, at least the de facto capital of Indonesia. So it's worth seeing it for that reason alone, just to see what the main city of Indonesia is like. But my number one tip would be to find a human element. So for me, actually doing 2 guided tours was a real game changer. It allowed me to ask questions to a Jakarta resident and get a little bit deeper information on what is happening in the city. If you're not going to do a guided tour, one tip that I heard from a hostel owner somewhere else in another city, he said, if you go to Jakarta, open up the Couchsurfing Hangouts app, because you'll find lots of locals to go for a drink with or a meal. I've used that app a few years ago, and it's actually really great for that purpose. I hadn't thought of it, but that seems like a really great tip if you're a backpacker and you're coming here and you want a little bit more of a human scale, like connection with Jakarta, because otherwise it can just be like a big city that can be quite overwhelming. Just learning about a country is part of traveling as well. So actually I've really enjoyed that aspect of Jakarta, and I think from that perspective it is actually essential. There's a big marching band starting up.
Thank you, marching band, for playing us out. Now, Jakarta was actually a stopover for me, on my way to the incredibly underrated region of Sulawesi. It's an off-the-beaten-path region that feels very much like the opposite of the over-commercialized Bali. If you want to follow along on my journey, be sure to subscribe or check out the next video.